U.S. presidents who were completely anti-LGBTQ. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video. 1. Dwight Eisenhower. After serving in the armed forces, Dwight Reagan was elected as the 34th President of the United States in 1953, and served continuously until 1961. He was commonly conservative, and passed some pretty homophobic laws in his late 50s presidential terms. In his first year as president, Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10,450 into law, which prohibited federal employees from any acts or groups considered subversive. Cited in the list of subversive activities were sexual perversion. Those found guilty of subversive fraternizing would be deemed a security risk liable for termination or denial of employment. This was a law set into place because homosexual employees were considered a blackmail risk. Americans commended the decision because it would help preserve integrity in government positions. Unfortunately, Americans were generally anti-LGBTQ in the 50s. After signing this monumental executive order into law, Ike remained quiet on the issue of gay rights and maintained his conservative political stance. 2. George W. Bush. As governor of Texas in 1994, Bush ignorantly said that he would veto an effort made to repeal the Texas sodomy law, citing that it was a way to instill traditional values in citizens. The next year he signed a bill into the Texas Family Code that would prohibit the marriage of any persons of the same sex in the state of Texas. He has been a constant opponent of gay rights since his days as governor, and even let a Texas bill die that would protect American citizens from hate crimes against their race, religion, or sexual orientation simply because he did not want to protect gay and lesbian Texans. Similarly, after the Boy Scouts of America famously passed a law that forced them to allow gays into their troops, Bush spoke out against the law, citing that it was a private organization that had a right to refuse entry. By his election in 2000, Bush had flipped the script and began to speak out against sodomy laws, but remained firm on his stance against gay marriage. 3. George H.W. Bush. As the elder presidential Bush, George H.W. brought a little more to the table than his firstborn son. Elected in 1989 after Ronald Reagan, Bush continued the reign of Republicans over the country after the 80s. Bush became involved in politics in the House of Representatives after founding his own oil company. By the age of 40, the Texas oil tycoon had already become a millionaire. In an interview, the elder Bush cited that if he found out that one of his grandchildren was gay, he would love them anyways, but he did tack on quite the homophobic comment. The president stated that if he found out his grandchild was gay, he would let them know that a gay lifestyle wasn't natural, and would talk them out of being gay rights activists. Despite these anti-LGBTQ views, George H.W. Bush was kind of a champion of gay rights throughout his time as president, and passed anti-hate crime laws that protect LGBTQ people to this day. 4. Richard Nixon. 37th President and shamed politician Richard Nixon was in office from 1969 until he resigned in 1974, to eventually be pardoned by Gerald Ford. Though he was the president to end the war in Vietnam, and subsequently pull American troops out of the jungle, that was where his liberal views ended. Going on the record, Nixon stated in August of 1970 that gay marriage was far off, that he was still trying to wrap his head around interracial marriages for the moment. Almost exactly 1 year later, Nixon went on the record as saying that homosexuality led to the fall of the ancient Greek Empire, and that in certain more gay-friendly parts of San Francisco, where he refused to shake hands with residents, Despite these horrific remarks about LGBTQ people, there was still a coalition of gay individuals in San Francisco that formed with the goal to re-elect Nixon in 1972. 5. Ronald Reagan. From 1981 to 1989, Ronald Reagan served as the 40th President of the United States. After serving out his elected position of Governor of California, he had a lot to do with the complete upheaval of American economics and turned a deficit into a surplus, but eventually this would backfire. However, what we're focused on is gay rights, a topic which Reagan had a lot of opinions. During his initial run for president, gay rights had just become prevalent in the U.S. and Reagan was clear that he could not and would not condone the alternative lifestyle of LGBTQ Americans. Many gay rights advocates were upset with Reagan's ability to completely ignore the AIDS epidemic that had taken thousands of lives by the end of the 1980s, to which his administration responded that since homosexuals and drug addicts were dying of the disease, they were simply getting what they justly deserve. During the Reagan administration, not one civil rights or LGBTQ rights law was passed, and until his death, Reagan was firm on his anti-gay political stance. 6. Harry S. Truman. This is the president that approved dropping the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the man who was in power at the mark of the catalyst that began the Cold War, the 33rd President of the United States from 1945 to 1953. During this time, countless atrocities against the LGBTQ community were also put into law, like the first sodomy law in the District of Columbia, that could lead to up to 10 years in prison and $1,000 in fines. 2 years later, Truman signed the Uniform Code of Military Justice into law, which would forbid sodomy among all military personnel, citing any penetration with a person of the same sex as punishable under the code. This would mark the beginning of the almost 75-year battle to get the homophobic tendencies of the American military repealed and the lives of LGBTQ forces instead protected by American law. Truman was not a friend of the LGBTQ community and seemed to have been a starting point for much of the struggle that the community faced over the years. 7. Franklin Roosevelt. Colloquially referred to as FDR, this is a president that is still well known in modern America. As the 32nd President of the United States, FDR dominated his party and served as a person of strength for Americans during a terrible economic time. FDR served as president from 1933 to 1937, during which he signed both the New Deal and the Second Deal. His second term was from 1937 to 1941, and in this time FDR passed much less major legislation. Before being elected President, Roosevelt took it upon himself to infiltrate the goings-on in the Navy while working as Assistant Secretary in 1919. In this time he requested an investigation into naval vice and depravity, which launched a sting operation in which naval officers and seamen were seduced into homosexual affairs. As a result, 17 sailors were jailed and court-martialed before public outcry halted the operation. Congress also passed a few homophobic laws while FDR was in the seat of president, which only furthered his anti-LGBTQ stance on civil rights. 8. William Howard Taft. Elected in 1908 as the successor of beloved President Theodore Roosevelt, and served as the 27th President of the United States. Later, President Warren G. Harding appointed Taft the Chief Justice of the United States, where he would serve almost until his death. Taft was a supporter of Booker T. Washington's program for the advancement of African Americans, but he gave what some might consider demeaning advice to the black scholar. Taft let Washington know that his people should completely avoid politics, that there were other places for the African community to thrive. Taft gave Washington the free advice that his people should focus on getting an education and entrepreneurship before even thinking about getting involved in politics. Aside from this brief moment of talking down to an African man in power, Taft stayed completely out of civil rights and issues therein. His ability to ignore what was a very real problem at the time of his presidency leads us to believe that he would do the same with gay rights if they had been prevalent at the dawn of this century.